And welcome everybody to another series of this three-part series that we're doing. We're welcoming this special edition. We're welcoming our students for this special edition of the MILPA show between Baktun 12 and MILPA that we are facilitating. So my name is Rosaura Figueroa Mendoza, and we are actually hosting CSU Monterey Bay students from Professor Chrissy Hernandez Participatory Action Research class. And so let me actually start again because my phone started ringing and I did not anticipate that. And that is annoying. So let me put that on silent. Make sure to put your stuff on silent. That's always a key thing. So with that, we're going to start all over again and see that's as easy as it gets. You could just start again. It's all good. So welcome everybody to this second part of this series that we are doing. Welcome, because we are doing actually a special edition of the MILPA between Baktun 12 and MILPA that we are facilitating. So my name is Rosaura Figueroa Mendoza, and we're actually hosting and welcoming our California State University Monterey-based students from Professor Chrissy Hernandez Participatory Action Research PAR class. And so again, this is a part 2 of a 3-part series. The students this morning will be actually speaking about the work that they've been doing on anti-racism, anti-colonialism. You'll get to learn a little bit more about the work that they've been doing and more about them. So with that, I'm going to actually pass it on to my co-host, Chago, to take it away.
Orale, thank you so much, Rosaura. And yes, it gives me a great honor to go ahead and present the students that I got the chance to work with in this pod, the anti-racism, anti-colonialism pod, as part of the course, the Participatory Action Research course with Professor Chrissy Hernandez. And I'm excited, and I know Rosaura is excited, and I know for our audiences out here, you will be able to get to learn something. For me personally, as a resident of East Salinas, born, raised here, you know, it's just, it's something for me personally, an opportunity to really dive in as deep as we can with these areas, these names that they're going to be presenting. So we'll go ahead and I'm going to introduce Korina McKinley, who will get us started.
Thanks, Chago, and Rosaura for that great introduction. So I'm Korina, and we are a Participatory Action Research team from CSUMB. And, you know, like Chago and Rosaura said, we are focusing on anti-racism and anti-colonialism. And so my group members will introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Brenda.
Hi, I'm Isaac.
Hi, I'm Estela.
Hi, I'm Lucia.
Hi, I'm James.
Sorry, so my computer's acting up. I apologize ahead of time. So in our class, we were able to choose between 3 different topics, one of them being divest and invest, reimagining our community, the other one being safety and power and economic recovery, and then the third one, which was anti-colonialism and anti-racism. So each of us are going to provide our own reasons why we chose this topic. For me, I chose this topic because racism is an ongoing issue in the United States, and as a nation now, it's even more important to be educated on these matters. So I am born and raised in Salinas. I lived here all my life. I love my community so much, but I don't know the full history behind it. I wasn't necessarily taught that. And so I thought it would be interesting to see how a city that is predominantly Latinx would, like Salinas, would unintentionally uphold colonialism. And so I will go ahead and pass it on to Korina.
Thanks, Isaac. So I chose this topic as my first choice, you know, because like Isaac said, you know, our country is in a very pivotal stage since the beginning of the year. And, you know, since I would say following the murder of George Floyd and all of the protests, I myself went out and protested. And, you know, protesting something like this, it changes something inside you. It changes a way of thinking that you have. And so this really was just like eye-opening for me in a way. And, you know, as someone who I've lived in Salinas all my life as well, and as someone who has both lived a life of privilege, but also without certain privileges. I just felt like it was important for me to really learn more about what it means to live in a city with people that look like me and us, and how this city and our area was still built on racism and colonization. And so with that, I'll pass it to Estela.
So this was my number one choice because, I pride myself in always keeping up with the national news, especially after Trump was put into office. As a teenager, I was really interested in keeping up with everything. But locally, I kind of fell off the wagon. I'm not as aware, or wasn't as aware as I would like to be. So I thought this was a really good opportunity for me to be more comfortable in knowing the history of, Salinas, the Salinas Valley. So yeah, with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to Brenda.
Yeah, so the reason I chose anti-racism and anti-colonialism is because it's just a very important topic of today and all of history. It's something that's really shaped our society and the way people treat each other. With the climax of today's political issues, I think it's important to talk about the topic that has been ignored for years. Racism is still exists, and it's been neglected in history books that praise colonizers. So when, we were choosing these topics, my immediate thought was, well, man, I really want to learn more about that, especially since, like my classmates have mentioned, it's very important right now with everything that's happened throughout this year. Me living in this town that's in Redding, California, it's very predominantly white, which is the opposite of Salinas. So I just was really interested in see how racism is shaped in the Salinas area. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to James. Tell us a little bit more why you chose this topic as well.
Well, I was super interested in this topic as, like we all said, with the news going on and everything that else is taking place around here. Since I'm not from Salinas Valley, I'm from San Jose. And being from San Jose, it's already such a diverse area with a lot of different groups of people, but majority of people here are Latinx. And I never really understood how much Salinas Valley affected San Jose. And then I wanted to go to school at CSU Monterey, and I found out that it's a predominantly Latinx school, and seeing how that impacts culture and community as a whole. And then from there, I wanted to see what I can do as my fair share and contribute into the anti-colonialism, see what I can take down racist past and histories to reframe my mindset and ideas to really push for a rewritten history of the Latinx people. And from there, I'm going to pass it on to Lucy.
Yes, hello. Well, yeah, I chose this racism and anti-colonialism as my top, because I feel like racism is something we live on today. And unfortunately, it's something that was created years ago and it still goes on today. Racism does, unfortunately, I feel like it does create violence within each other and in our community. There is a lot of violence to racism, especially now, like with our president going on and like everything that's happening. And I feel like in order to make our community safer, like we have to put the effort and willingness to hear and try to understand other viewpoints and come up with an agreement within each other. And then moving on, racism and colonialism has been around for as long as we can remember, given that we live in predominantly Latinx community, it is easy to forget how these ideas still impact our community. Our first step for this project was to create a background project. We decided to take a look into the history of the area and see how these ideas have grown in our society. We have broken down the history into 3 parts: the origin, the past, World War II, and the modern. So I'm gonna pass it on to Estela if you want to elaborate a little more on that.
Yeah, so like Lucy mentioned, we tried to narrow down and really categorize the history we were going to talk about in our background research. This kind of posed a struggle for us because we didn't know where to even start. You know, do we categorize it? Do we keep it in Salinas, like just the city? Do we broaden it to the Salinas Valley, the Monterey County? You know, there were so many ways we could have approached it. But ultimately, we chose to focus on how racism and colonialism has affected our community in the Salinas Valley in terms of, or in 3 different periods, like she said. The first one was the origin, and by that we mean, you know, the Estela Nation and how the Spaniards came. I'm so sorry, I got so nervous. Do you want me to start over again? Yeah, okay, so I'm so sorry.
It's all good, it's all good. Take a deep breath, take a deep breath.
I get anxiety attacks, so.
Should I bring
And also
up
don't
the
apologize.
site?
There's no need to apologize. You're doing
Okay.
great.
Sorry,
Should I pull up the
I just
site?
get nervous.
You're fine, Estela. You're good. You got this. Would this be a good time though to start sharing the site, or would we maybe just
Whatever
show it
y'all-
at the end?
However y'all want to do it.
I think maybe like once Estela, if it transitions over to you, since you're in control of it, Korina, at the next point that it transitions, or maybe at some point where they acknowledge, like even if it's Estela goes, like if someone at any point, if you just announce it basically, and maybe Korina could go ahead and bring up the site for us, kind of thing.
Okay.
It's up to you, and that'll be to you all.
Okay, so I'm just gonna start off like you said, and I'm just gonna ask you.
Okay.
Okay. So if Korina wants to go ahead and share her screen so we can get started on that part. Okay, so like Lucy mentioned, we tried to really narrow down and categorize the history we would be focusing on our research project. So for this part, we kind of struggled a little bit because we didn't know where to get started. Should we focus on the Salinas Valley or the city of Salinas alone? But ultimately, we finally settled on 3 different times in history, which Lucy has just mentioned. The first one being what we called the origin. So this is a time where the Estela Nation originally was in this area, and how the Spaniards took over and colonized this area. And then we also discussed World War II and how World War II, around that time, Japanese Americans really struggled. There were 15 internment camps in California, I believe, at the time in 1942, and one of them was actually the Salinas Sports Complex. And it held, I believe, 3,600 Japanese Americans at the time. So we talked about that. And then we also discussed field workers and that more modern era, which is like 60s, 70s and onward. This was personal for a lot of us because we are either all related to somebody who was a field worker, or we know somebody who was. For me personally, that was my grandfather and my grandmother. My grandfather was actually a part of the huelgas with Cesar Chavez. So when we were doing the background research, I talked to him about his experience, and he would tell me how before Cesar Chavez came in, there were no rights. Like they didn't have any breaks, they didn't get lunch breaks, they didn't have porta potties or anything. They would actually have to go behind a bush to go use the restroom. And for women, this was a problem because, in all honesty, they would get raped. And he would talk to me about that, and that really brought out a lot of passion and a lot of anger, you know. So that's, I feel like the background project for us really set us up for the rest of our research, really set up us having that passion and that drive to want to learn more and to do more. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and pass it on to Isaac, and he'll go on and talk about more about the project we did.
All right. Thank you, Estela, for giving us the information about our background project. So after that, since that was the first stepping stone for us, we developed a research question off of that, and it was based on the importance of names in the community. And so from there, we began to throw out so many different names because we wanted to know which names did we know off the top of our head that reflected our community, which ones were we taught in school, which ones were we taught in the house. And then so we created such a long list, and then from there we were able to narrow it down to 3 different names, which we decided would be Cesar Chavez, Tiburcio Vasquez, and William Hartnell. So the reason why we chose these people is because we chose Cesar Chavez for his active involvement with field workers. And as you guys know, Salinas is a huge agricultural community. We chose Tiburcio Vasquez because his name actually was brought forth in a recent controversy with the naming and renaming of the now known elementary school Montebello. And then lastly, we chose Hartnell because my apologies. We chose Hartnell because the only community college and only source of higher education in Salinas is named after him. And then so to specifically talk about the research, I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Brenda.
Thank you, Isaac. So when it came to how we're going to put input from the community, many ideas were exchanged. We faced several obstacles like the inability to interact with anyone outside our household in person. Many questions began to circle in our group. How would we conduct this sort of research? Would we do a survey? Should we try to type some sort of survey? How would we obtain information we needed? Initially, we intended to send out surveys, but we soon realized that would be not the best option. The idea of interviews was proposed. That the idea left us a bit nervous, but we decided this would be the best method to learn about the feelings and thoughts that the community has on this topic. So who within the community would we interview and how was like a question we thought about. Given that the nation is in the middle of a global pandemic, we could not go out into the public and get responses. We decided to email the public, students, teachers, parents, and a few other locals. We asked for their participation. During this process, it was a little bit hard trying to get, we thought that we would get a lot of responses back to people we could interview because we sent out a lot of emails. I mean, each of us sent emails to teachers and students, and despite it being hard, we were still able to maintain some interviews, and I think we got some pretty good interviews. So to talk about how we interviewed people, we began to interview the process by asking a few questions of their feelings and thoughts of the individuals, either Hartnell, Cesar Chavez, or Tiburcio Vasquez, since these are the names that we decided to look into and we were so interested in. We started the interview with a small introduction of who we are, and we asked the interviewees who they are as well. So we moved on and gave the interviewees a brief history about the names and just things that they might have not known about these names. Getting their responses for their question, we then asked them a few questions after the brief history. We asked them what are their feelings and thoughts through this history. What feelings and thoughts does this history bring up for you? And if you were to name a school after someone, who will that be and why? And so I'm going to go ahead and talk about, pass it on to Korina to talk a little more about this.
You're on mute, Korina. Korina? You're on mute.
Sorry, the Zoom like disappeared. It wouldn't give me the option to like click on it to unmute myself, and so I had to close the Google site, and now I gotta open it again real quick. Sorry,
Yeah, no
guys.
worries. No worries. You're good.
Let me just go open it real quickly, and then I'll go back to sharing it. Uh-oh. This is
Keep breathing, folks. You're doing
In the
good.
meantime, yeah, y'all are doing great. This is really cool. I really like the visuals. Good job on that, yo.
okay, here we go. Okay, I'm unmuted now, right? Okay, now I'm gonna share my screen and hopefully I won't lose it again, but I might. Okay, you guys can see it, right? Okay, so the next thing we did after our interviews, once we had them all completed, we had to figure out, you know, how we were gonna code everything. And so coding is what we do to label and organize and basically identify themes within and across each interview. So we chose like different words or phrases and sentences and labeled them under several themes that we as a group had discussed and recognized were common throughout each interview. And so, you know, for example, you know, one of the themes that that stood out to me, kind of that I recognized, was had to do with people's inspiration. When we asked, you know, what would you name a school or a place after? And, you know, one person said Michelle Obama because, you know, she's a great representation for women and also women of color. But also there were other mentionings like Dolores Huerta and, you know, these different inspirations. You know, it really ties back into like having more representation for people that look like us. And so with that, I'm gonna ask James, what was something for you? Oh no, I lost myself.
Sorry about that. Something I took away from the interview was that I never knew the word basero until one of our interviewees had said it. And I had asked the group to understand a little bit more about Latinx culture. And I found out that the word meant like union workers. And then from there, I started to gain a deeper understanding of the backbone of Salinas Valley, since most of our interviewees were working in government positions or working in the fields. And then I think from there, really allowed me to grasp the Latinx community from pre-colonial, after colonialism as a whole. And then it really, I think, gaining a little bit more insight onto some of the words that I picked up, I think it just helped me kind of immerse myself in the culture a little bit more, to help me really understand what it really means to be anti-racist in Salinas Valley, whether it's renaming schools or whether it's acknowledging certain street signs or even educating the elementary school such as Cesar Chavez and having a celebration day for him. Next, I'm going to pass it on to Lucy.
Yes, hello. Well, I just like saying some of our interviewees did associate with Cesar Chavez as field workers, farm workers, or they had family members who worked in the fields. I, like myself, have had family members who were part of the agricultural community. In fact, my grandpa himself was a bracero, part of the program. And then moving on, like something else that stood out to me was how I personally went to the school, Cesar Chavez Elementary School, and they would have this big celebration for his birthday. Like they would go and do parades, have like a whole day kind of focusing on who he is. But something I did notice is when they would talk about the history and who he was, I feel like they only taught us what they wanted us to know, not really the full-on history of who he was. So something based on the research we've done and in our group and everything, like something I learned from was how he was kind of, I guess, like racist towards like immigrants and like didn't really like them. So something like an interview did mention that kind of relates to that would be like, these are like their words. We are trying to get better wages from people and that are already here, and they are just bringing more people that are doing the work. I mean, I can understand both sides. In other words, meaning Cesar Chavez was fighting for having better wages, better working conditions for these individuals, but more like, I guess, illegal immigrants were coming in and like filling in those jobs. So it wasn't really like helping out the whole movement. And I feel like that's something that wasn't really mentioned in the movies or like was really taught in school. And if it's something, and also something else someone said, like they really need to teach this part of the history more into school and like go a little more in depth. So like to have a better understanding of the whole situation and like who he is and what he actually did and how everything just came up and started moving on. So with that, I will be passing it on to Estela. What did you find?
So for me, something that stood out when we were doing the interviews is that one of the interviewees actually referred to herself as being half and half. And by that, she meant that she had Mexican parents and she embraced her Mexican culture. But at the same time, she did identify as American. And then another one actually said, quoted La India Maria, saying, ni de aquí ni de allá. So, I mean, I personally identified with that because when I lived in Oregon, that's how I felt. I mean, it was at home, I wasn't Mexican enough. I didn't speak enough Spanish, you know? And then I'd go to school and everybody would mock me because I wouldn't say stuff the right way, or I would eat a burrito for lunch when everybody else was eating their Lunchables. So I really related to them in that way. And I shared a lot of the same struggles. And I think so many people, not just here, but everywhere, have the same struggles. And I know that Brenda also dealt with something similar. If you want to go ahead and explain your history with that.
Yeah, so I can relate to very much of what Estela just said so strongly. My hometown is quite literally the opposite of Salinas. It's predominantly white. I remember during an interview, someone was talking about how they would get a whole day off of school to celebrate the day of Cesar Chavez, and I know Cia just mentioned that too. Whereas for my schools, when we would had celebrations for Columbus Day, we would literally be taught about this man who created a mass genocide of Native people from this land. Growing up in this town, every period we had to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and I was never taught even who Cesar Chavez was. They never taught that name or mentioned that name in my schools here. So for me, being raised very American made me at a young age have an identity crisis. At school, I was one of the very few colored people. There's like one Black kid and like 3 Mexicans like me. And it wasn't accepted to be Mexican here. And I remember when Trump got inaugurated, we literally had to watch his inauguration during class. And I remember a classmate turning to me and saying, "Wow, I can't wait till all the Mexicans get deported out of here." Saying that to me as a Mexican. My appearance is very much, nopal en la frente, but the way I talk and I guess the way I would act, Mexicans would, family members would always say it is bien fresa, or you're so whitewashed. So it's always been hard for me to be enough Mexican and be enough American. So I can hella relate to the ni de aquí ni de allá quote from the India Maria. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it on to Isaac with some things that stood out to you that you felt so strongly of from these interviews.
Thank you, Brenda. So one thing that you brought up was education. That was actually a recurring thing when we talked to all these interview people. A lot of them didn't know the history behind these people. And then we thought, so an issue that was brought up was the lack of representation in the history. And so a direct quote from one of our interview people, it says, they need to be in our history books. We need people to represent the Latino people. And that's so important because if you think back to your education growing up, how often were Latinos or people of color stories told in those books? For me personally, not very many. It was always histories about these colonizers, but they were painted in such a positive manner. And that does skew the way that we think. For example, one of the interviewers that we had, we told her about the history of Hartnell, how he married a 16-year-old, and that was thought to be a strategic move just to gain land in Salinas. Her thought was that it was okay that he did that, and she was rationalizing it by saying that it was because he was a businessman and that was okay. And then when we told her about it was speculated that he had indigenous workers that he did not pay, she said that he was trying to help them in their own way. And she also mentioned that we have to take into consideration the time periods for us to understand. And I don't necessarily think that's true, because just because it was in the past does not give it validation, does not make it okay. But I feel like the history that we've learned kind of skewed these people in such a positive light where everyone can think that it's okay that they did these actions because it is in the past. And so I also wanted to talk about the importance of names. I don't know if any of you guys have read The Crucible. I mean, I wouldn't have. I was assigned for it at school, so that's the only reason why I read it, but I was able to relate to it. So part of it was the impact of names. So the main character, John Proctor, kept on talking about the importance of names and the impact that it has and the legacy behind it. So we thought it was important to have more representation in names throughout our community. Because when you look at these people, when you look at instances, you don't get to see a lot of, not validation, validation in a way, where you get to see these names and be like, hey, that name is like the one that I have. I feel seen. I don't have to feel left out, like how a few of my group members taught. And so we thought that that was the main thing that we needed to focus on a community. Not only do we have to elect people that better reflect our ideals and community, we need to start paying attention to the names around us. And one issue that I found was that for the school Montebello now that it's referred to, when it was Tiburcio Vasquez, they were so quick to change the name. But a person that like Hartnell, where his name came under controversy, I believe it was claimed that it would be too expensive to change. So I thought, what was the difference between changing the name of Tiburcio Vasquez and the difference to change Hartnell? So I just wanted to open this up. So if you guys had any questions or anything that you wanted to ask us.
So this is because I was around the research or your process, and but I didn't get a chance really to to hear. I mean, which some of your own personal experiences, like Brenda's, and what it does for me, it's like, and this is a question for all of you, how that in terms of the personal connection that that personal drive for these answers, what was your own motivation for this, besides the grade, right? Like, just let us know. It's because like here, I and every one of y'all gave examples, right? But I guess what I'm curious to know is, like, just that feeling, like how did that make you feel, right? And because here we are, it's like you're discovering this about, I mean, we are sometimes you probably want to connect or say that, hey, I am where I'm from. You know, you are what you eat. Sometimes some of us, you know, we represent the place that we're from. And then to learn about, again, like, oh, the history of where you're from. How was that feeling? How did that make you feel?
For me personally, I mean, learning about all this kind of made me feel like I didn't actually know where I'm from, because like I said, I was born and raised in Salinas, but I didn't know all the history behind this. It wasn't something that was taught. But then it also brought up a lot of different experiences and emotions that I had in the past. Because before this, I thought I kind of thought Salinas was like not perfect, but it was very like it had its own sense of community within the Latinx sense. But then I thought of all the experiences that I had that were impacted by racism. Like I was driving down the street close to Hardenell, actually, and this one guy on a motorcycle cut me off and yelled, "Go back to Mexico." And so I hadn't thought about that experience, and because it happened a few years ago, I hadn't thought about that in such a long time. And doing this research, it made me realize that like instances like that, they came forward.
Living in this town, I have gotten that similar thing a lot. Like I just recently, I was listening to music, like, you know, Mexican, you know, ass music, and this truck drives by. I don't like turning down my windows because I don't like other people listening to Mexican music. This redneck ass truck drives by, you know, with their Trump 2020 flags on and they're everywhere in this town. And he goes, turn that fucking music off, like that. And just also recently driving home from work, was like turning and I could just see this car and hear my music, and he's just the most disgusted face ever. I mean, I get this often. Like that's why I was personally persuaded to want to go to a school that is in a very Hispanic area. And that's like, I was just so excited to finally go to a new place, because I don't think a lot of people realize the type of discrimination that's in places that are very white. Like it's not the same living in NorCal than it is living in SoCal.
Or Central Cal, right?
Yeah. I think for me, it was upsetting. You know, I feel like this whole year has kind of been upsetting in various ways, but you know, with all the recent like extra light that has been shed, you know, on police brutality and, you know, militarization of police and mass incarceration, you know, all of these things are kind of, it's one big picture, and all these things are just little pieces. And all of these institutions, prisons and schools and all of these, the courts, the justice system, all of this has been built on like legacies and racism to keep people that aren't considered white down. And so I guess it's upsetting, but it also it's upsetting enough where it makes me like want to, you know, do stuff like this project, you know, where I want to try to start to make a difference, whether it's just locally in my community and we have to start here, you know, with whatever things happen here. You know, me and my group mates were just talking about the DUI crash with a kid from Carmel that killed Rosie, and we were talking about that and how they're dismissing his case. And, you know, if this had been like 2 kids that were Latino or 2 kids that were Black, or, you know, they wouldn't be having the opportunity to go to rehab and go back home because a woman is dead. Like, this woman lost her life, and it doesn't look like either of these kids, when there was only 2 of them that were there, could have done it. And, you know, it just makes you think and question. And it's just crazy because I have my own stuff with the law, and like the same district attorney's office that like is refusing to go after these white kids is coming after somebody, you know, like me, I guess, for something like that's not murder. You know, so it's like another personal aspect. It's all upsetting, and so I think there's just a lot of work that needs to be done. I'm actually going to reshare our Google site, our last page, because we do have a few things listed on here, kind of as like calls to action, you know, in a way, and like just some questions to think about. So, you know, like as we were talking about, you know, education is a big thing, educating others, educating ourselves, and just really learning the history behind names and places and just the place where you're from, the original people. Before this class and all this research, I never knew of the Estela Nation or Ohlone Costanoan. Like I never knew any of this. And so it kind of helps give a different perspective too, I guess. I don't know if anybody else wants to talk on like things that we can do or that can be done. I want to give you guys the opportunity too.
I have something to say. I think right on primary election day, Chago was busy counting votes, and I am recently taking a poli-sci class. So I got brought up the question: does public opinion impact public policy? And I thought about that to a pretty significant kind of level, knowing that local politics does play a bigger picture within a whole nation. So I kind of thought about Chago's role within Salinas Valley and how he is part of Baktun 12 and MILPA, and seeing how if he's able to change certain local policies that addresses these racial issues, then from there, does the whole community get affected, and does it really change public opinion, and how does that really change the mindset and the framework of the everyday people? Like I'm pretty sure will that reform the police budget? Because Korina shared that. I don't know if you mind me sharing about.
No, that's fine.
Yeah, so Korina recently shared that she constantly told us, and it was really reinforcing the idea that 45% of Salinas's budget goes towards the police. And I find that really shocking of how much money is actually being funded towards the police. And doing this research, we were looking up Cesar Chavez school, and it was actually quite alarming to me to see that on the school page they had a picture of a police and a giant army tank, and it was just kind of outrageous for me to see how much is actually being funded. And I don't know whether like the mayor's mindset or someone in the like government political leaders thinking that more money equates to safer community terms. And then while looking up pictures, I saw like a map of gang territories within Salinas Valley, and from the people we've met throughout this class, discussing how they went to jail and then they got released from jail, and then going through like a program that allows gang members to for gang members to find a second opportunity for themselves, that allows them to not be placed back in these systematic institutions. I think that's a really big change versus knowing that if you do go to jail, you're more likely to fall back into it just because they don't have the right kind of programs or the rehabilitation for these people. And I think Chago's role, I think if he's able to do these small kind of impact in like our small research, I think we're able to hit a bigger community. And then from there, I think it's hits a whole bigger picture as a whole.
Off of what James is talking about how there's so much money being funded to the police, something that reminds me of, because during an interview, one of the interviewees was like, oh, changing the name is such a big slap in the face for who that name represents. Because we're talking about the name Russo Vasquez, and she was talking about how he's really representing the Hispanic community and how there's not enough Hispanic people representing us. And so changing the name is a big slap in the face, and it is, because they care more to give money to funding police brutality, or not brutality, but just policing, and not enough money like they don't care enough to put money into changing the name from a racist name to like a name that needs to represent the community. Like I feel like that's very important, that needs to be mentioned. Also, to go off of Korina was mentioning about, you know, she did go through a case and is going through a case right now. And I, at the beginning of this, was going through a case myself. And I remember looking for, what is it called? Lawyers, or there's a name for it, like
Attorney legal assistance.
Legal assistance. When I was looking for legal assistance, my mom actually knew a lady who helps out Hispanic people, and this lady, she's like a lawyer's assistant. She literally told me that her lawyer is the lawyer she works for is the only one that is willing to help out Hispanics in this community. She says she literally told me that I was gonna have so much trouble looking for legal assistance anywhere because they're mostly all racist, and people in the court, in our courthouse, are actually very much racist too. So that very much sucks.
And, you know, that plays into kind of like the representation that, you know, we need different kinds of representation. Minorities and people of color, you know, we need more Latinx lawyers, we need more African-American lawyers, we need more people of color that are in office. Uh-oh, did I freeze?
You're good.
Oh, okay. Everybody froze. I was like, oh no.
I think she's frozen now. Maybe she'll jump back in and but I think let's go ahead and hear from Lucy or Estela. Haven't heard from you on this, either of you.
So going back to what you were saying, what all of this brought up. So like I said, coming from somewhere like Oregon, kind of straying away from the conversation we were just having. You know, as a little girl, I had that experience where it was like, I was getting out of school, waiting for my mom, and this lady just decided to tell me to go back to my country and just come at me as a first grade 7-year-old girl. And I was terrified, you know, it's something scary when a grown-up is coming at you and telling you to go to back to your country when you are living in the country you were born in. And then moving here to Salinas and seeing and living the experience of just going to Alisal and having all your classmates be the same as you, you know, they all speak Spanish, or a good majority of them speak Spanish. And they eat the same food, they do the same things, you know, they share your same experiences. I didn't think about it. I didn't think about racism or colonialism when I thought about Salinas. I thought this was like a safe haven, you know what I mean? It's somewhere that I felt comfortable. So doing this project has really opened up the idea of, hey, racism is everywhere. Like, you don't escape it anywhere you go, you know? So yeah, I don't know if Lucy has something to say.
No, yeah. For me, well, I feel like I grew up in a very Mexican neighborhood and everything. I went to very Mexican schools. I went to Cesar Chavez. I went to Alsa, and majority of the people who go there are like Latinx. So like for me, I feel like it was very normal to be Mexican. And then like we would be taught in school like Spanish. It was both bilingual, Spanish and English. So it was like Mexican community was like very like big there. So I was like, well, like moving in and like going to school, I went to Hartnell, like I didn't really like knew the history of it, and like learning the history of it, I was like, it was very like eye-opening. I was like, wow, like they really need to teach this like to everybody, like not like having people going out and like do their own research about it, because not everybody has time or is like able to do the research we did based on these individuals. And I feel like someone did mention it in like our interviews, like this needs to be taught more in school. Like people need to learn about this, be more informed. Like our community like needs to like be more like be able to be more involved. And I feel like schools, teaching them in schools, it's a great way, because majority of the people goes to school, and like kids, like teaching them like a very young age. And like I feel like just teaching them, because I didn't know like history of this until I came to this class and like learned about it, like did research. And I feel like, yeah, like the community like needs to know and be about all this, not just like having to like learn it on their own time, because I did mention that not everybody has time for it. And so yeah, that's
And you said something really important to learn this education at a very young age. My question to you all, and I think what we'll do is we could probably bring it to a close now. But I do want to I'll go ahead and ask this question, and then I know that I think Korina had some some final thoughts, and then we'll open up the final thoughts to all y'all. But my last question, this last question is, how young is too young? Like, how young is too young to begin learning the truth about where you live?
well, I'll go. Since I feel like I went to Cesar Chavez, like since I was in kindergarten, I was taught about who he was, what he did, his movement. So I feel like really like kindergarten, like I was taught that like the whole year when I was there, we would do these marches, we would celebrate his name, we would celebrate who he is. And I feel like at the beginning, since you start school, would be like a great way to start knowing. You might not fully understand it, but as you move on from grade level to grade level, you have a deeper understanding of the whole situation. And I feel like at a very young age, like kindergarten would be a great way to start. I don't know if anybody else wants to add on to that.
Yeah.
So I'll go. Oh, sorry. Korina, you can go ahead.
I'll just, okay. I want to say before I forget it, just because like, that's a great question, because like on our website, I did add, saying, we may need to make adjustments to the American education system, and rather than glorifying colonization, an accurate and age appropriate history should be told. So I mean, obviously right off the bat, we're not going to go and be like, oh, Columbus came and killed all of these Indians and raped all of these women and did all of these horrible things. Like obviously that's not something that you're going to come out and be like, oh, here you go, to a 6-year-old, right? But kids are people, kids are young people. And so I think it depends on the content of what you're trying to tell, on how old, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it depends on what you're trying to say. So I do feel like rather like, kindergarten is a good age, because they do start right away with, oh, Columbus discovered America. And rather than going right into, oh, Columbus came and discovered America, instead of that whole narrative, we need to say, these were the people that were originally here, and this man came. And instead of going into graphic details about it, you got to build on that as kids age, but you have to implement the idea that Americans or the white men or these, Columbus, these were not the people that were here first, and that's like the main idea that has to be implemented from the very beginning, Exactly. You're never too young to start thinking critically. I'm constantly telling these guys, my 6-year-old thinks he's going to be 30 next year. Like the way he speaks to me, I'm just like, where is your mind? He thinks Donald Trump is a mean man because he says mean things. Like he's literally heard him. I mean, he's getting a little lesson in, for example, he's in 1st grade. And the content of his lessons, his history lessons, they are teaching him about racism and slavery. And I was surprised that they were teaching him this already, but it's not too early. He made the connection because my papa, we live with my grandparents, and my papa, he's Black. He basically was like my dad. And so my 6-year-old made the connection and said, so like they were talking about water fountains, how, you know, there was a colored and there was white. And he said, so people didn't like my papa because of how he looked. And that was just like such a, the way he said it, he was so sad. You know, he was just like, people didn't like papa, like because of his skin. Like he was so confused, you know, but it's so important that we start telling them, even this young, you know, the truth, because the truth, you know, they say the truth hurts, but, you know, in all reality, the truth sets you free. Sorry, that was a lot longer than I planned.
And then I'm so glad that I went after you because I wanted to build on some stuff that you said. I think it's true. Like you can tell the truth to little kids and have it be age appropriate. In a way, I kind of thought about it when you learn a language, you don't just drop college level vocab on a 3-year-old. No, you teach them step by step at appropriate levels. That can be the same thing with telling the truth about history, because when I was a little kid, we were talking about, like Korina said, Columbus Day and like Thanksgiving and everything, just very sugar coated, but they had no problem sharing that. They didn't have a problem sharing this skewed image or false narrative that they wanted to put forward. So I think it's necessary and completely appropriate to have younger kids learn about the truth behind it. Like I said, you don't have to go into graphic detail, even like Korina said, like you don't have to, but you can still tell the truth.
All right, James, what do you think? Any last thoughts, James?
Well, I was watching this video the other day on Native Americans looking at Thanksgiving books, and they were looking at children's books. And I think I like how they pointed out that some of these children's books, they are very childlike, but they paint a false narrative to the colonialism that does exist. And I think at the end of the video, for their closing comments, they brought up to the point that it's never too early to teach the education, to give them a semi idea of what actually happened and a more correct, accurate narrative. But I think something that they said to me that really stood out was the fact that as you get older as an adult, they want adults to be like aware and to know the situation at hand of what actually happened to these people, and just more than like a fake Pocahontas story that's glorified and like Disney personified, to like actually understand the real story of Pocahontas and what actually happened to her, and to really understand that it wasn't just like this magical fairy tale. It's actually like a horrific story of what actually happened. And I think that's just something that our group really took away from addressing anti-colonialism and anti-racism. Now we understand Native land, we understand Salinas Valley's budget, and then we understand, and then Korina is also a mom, so she's understanding the idea of the information being taught and what she can do to really make an impact, not only herself, but also her kids. And then I think Shaga with like local politics. And then from there, we have like a bigger shell of pronouns and like LGBTQ rights within different communities, and Estela's like migrant workers and families, and Brenda just being in a different predominantly white demographic area. And then on top of that, it's like mental health issues. So it's just really like, it's just the root of the problem stemmed into a bigger tree that we can really start to nip in the bud.
Awesome. Estela.
So going back to what they were saying about the education and how things aren't taught the way that they are. I remember in middle school, some teacher actually got in trouble for saying Columbus didn't technically discover America. There was a complaint and she got into trouble with the principal because of it, which I thought was absolutely insane. And then there was another incident as well where I would ask my 7th grade history teacher, that's around the age where you start to learn more about actual history. Like you actually have a class in history, I think they call it social studies. We were learning about civil rights and I asked about Cesar Chavez and my teacher was like, oh no, like we're not talking about that in class. And I was just baffled because I'm like, that's a part of my history, so why are we only learning about Black history? Why are we only learning about a specific narrative, you know? So I think that we need to broaden and learn from different perspectives, because right now it's just one, and I think that needs to change.
And even when the Black history is being taught, it's not being taught from an authentic, genuine, you know, well-researched, and you know, just a grounded place, right? It was always whatever was on the surface. So yes, thank you, Estela. Lucy.
So yeah, like they did mention, like we do, like going back to like, yeah, we need to teach like young age. Isaac mentioned like slowly, level by level. Yeah, that really needs to be heard, and like kids learn at a very young age. Like they know what's right and wrong, and they can relate to everything. Like just, oh my god, I'm like
You got it. I got it. You got it. You know, the actual work will speak for will speak for it, right? You know, sometimes we just can't find the words, but you're all are in it. You're in this work now. You know, you're discovered it at this point, and I'm excited for y'all to continue doing. I'm encouraging you all to continue doing this step, and with that, I'm gonna go ahead and we'll go to Brenda, who's, you know, she's as the farthest away from all of us, right? But you know, Brenda, you know, Reading is real. You know, I have an idea. I visited the spot once, and you know, what is this all? You know, what does this all look like from where you're at? In terms of this question, you know, what is too young to begin learning this? How young can you be, right? Or how long? What is too young, right? To begin grasping these ideas. So go ahead, Brenda.
Well, first of all, I was just telling my group the other day when we met how my close friend who works for an after-school program was telling me about these racist things her students, who are 7-year-olds, say to her. When during the election week, she would tell me, "Oh, I just had a student who just encouraged me to vote for Trump." And I told him, no, can't talk about politics with you. The student literally, she was telling me about how they were eating pears, and they were like called Asian pears or whatever. And the student literally said, "Will this pear make me Asian?" I mean, the kids here growing up here are so racist already. And thank God my nieces and nephews are nowhere like that. My nephew, who's 10 years old, he's always talking to me about when Black Lives Matter was like really like, right, you know, right after George Floyd died. He was asking me, "Who is this guy? Why are we advocating for him?" You know, and I would tell him, I would be straight up, because he's 10, he can know what happened. And I told him, and just how invested this 10-year-old was into why our world is like this is so interesting to me. Like he literally would, like, when we would see Trump on the screen, he'd be like, "Kaka, that's poo-poo. That's a bad guy. I'm like, "Yep, that is a bad guy." And like, it's important for me to see them, because they are being raised in this very white town the way I am. And I know that like his little sisters, who are 4 and 6, they don't like speaking Spanish, and it gets me so mad. They don't like speaking Spanish. They don't like saying I'm Mexican, but that's not their fault, and that sucks. But definitely you learn at a young age, and it's definitely how you're surrounded and how you're taught, like what's right and what's wrong. But I think definitely what I really would emphasize is, because I did forget to mention that the street name that's literally like 10 feet away from me is Hartnell. Literally a name that is praised from a guy who married a Mexican for land and money. Why are we praising him? Why are we having street names of him? And why aren't children being taught this? And why did I never learn Cesar Chavez growing up? Like, it's so important, no matter where you are, to be taught these things, you know? So yeah, I would definitely close with learn the names of your schools, learn the names of your streets, because hey, this stuff is so important. Like, and kids should know about this stuff.
Right on. Thank you so much, y'all. All right, that concludes our show. I know our homegirl Rosaura had to step out. So with that, I want to just say thank you to each of you for the work. And again, you know, just encouraging you, and you all know, like, wow, oh my goodness, there's so much. You know, it's like you started doing a little bit of work and you're like, oh my goodness, like it's all colonized, right?
Yeah, it's like an endless pit, like a bottomless pit, and you
like,
just never ends. You're just gonna keep on digging.
Right. So, but there's so much that we can learn from about ourselves too, you know, in this work. And so thank you very, very much, y'all.